On May 27, 2001, the arrest that would shatter Frankfort, Michigan wasn't accompanied by sirens or breaking news alerts. Instead, it happened quietly at 7:15 a.m. in the parking lot of Benzie County Medical Center, where 71-year-old Earl Thompson had just finished mopping the same hallways he'd cleaned for 23 years. The beloved janitor, known for his gentle demeanor and willingness to work double shifts, offered no resistance as Detective Sarah Martinez read him his rights for the murder of Jennifer Walsh, a name that had haunted this lakeside community for 20 years. But to understand how that morning rewrote everything Frankfort thought it knew about safety and trust, we have to go back to the early hours of May 28, 2001, when the night shift at Benzie County Medical Center was winding down, and 29-year-old registered nurse Jennifer Walsh was preparing to drive home after what would be her final shift. If you've been following cases like this, you know how crucial these initial moments become. So make sure you're subscribed, because the evidence we'll uncover becomes more disturbing with each layer we peel back. Jennifer Walsh had always been the kind of nurse that patients remembered long after their discharge. At 29, she possessed the rare combination of clinical expertise and genuine compassion that made her invaluable during the graveyard shift at Frankfort's only hospital. Her supervisor, charge nurse Linda Morrison, would later tell investigators that Jennifer seemed distracted during her final night, checking the wall clock more frequently than usual, and mentioning that she was looking forward to her upcoming vacation to visit her sister in Denver. The last person to see Jennifer alive was Dr. Michael Stevens, the attending physician who had worked alongside her for 3 years. At 6:47 a.m., he watched Jennifer gather her belongings from the nurse's station, her brown leather purse slung over her shoulder as she headed toward the employee exit. She had seemed tired, Stevens recalled, but not unusually so for someone finishing a 12-hour night shift. She'd mentioned something about stopping at the grocery store on her way home, wanting to pick up ingredients for the dinner she was planning to cook for her boyfriend that evening. What happened in the 200 feet between the hospital's employee exit and Jennifer's red Honda Civic would consume the next 2 decades of questions and theories. At 7:23 a.m., maintenance worker Bob Fletcher discovered Jennifer's car sitting in the employee parking lot with the engine running and the driver's door hanging open like a mouth frozen in a silent scream. The heater was running at full blast, despite the mild May morning, and the radio played softly from WKLT, the local station Jennifer always tuned to during her commute. Her purse remained on the passenger seat, wallet intact, with the $67 in tips she'd earned from grateful patients' families. Her car keys dangled from the ignition, and her hospital ID badge lay on the asphalt beside the open door. The only signs of disturbance were a small scuff mark in the gravel near the driver's side door, and Jennifer's left sneaker, a white Nike she'd bought specifically for the long hours spent on her feet, found 20 feet away, partially hidden under a parked pickup truck. Sheriff Tom Bradley had been elected based more on his 30 years as a state trooper than his investigative experience, and Jennifer Walsh's disappearance would test every skill he'd acquired during his law enforcement career. With a department of 6 officers covering the entire county, Bradley found himself managing the most complex case in Benzie County's modern history, with resources better suited for drunk driving arrests and domestic disputes. The first 48 hours proved crucial in ways that wouldn't become apparent for 2 decades. Deputy Mike Carson, fresh from completing detective training in Lansing, arrived at the scene 34 minutes after Fletcher's 911 call. In the bright morning sunlight and gentle breeze coming off Lake Michigan, Carson made decisions that would haunt the investigation for years to come. He allowed hospital personnel to move vehicles in the parking lot to accommodate the morning shift change, inadvertently contaminating potential tire impression evidence. The scuff mark in the gravel was photographed but not cast in plaster, and the mild weather made preserving any trace evidence nearly impossible. Jennifer's parents, Robert and Patricia Walsh, received the call at their farm outside Traverse City at 8:15 a.m. Patricia, a retired school administrator, immediately began making lists and phone calls with the methodical precision that had served her well during 35 years in education. Robert, who owned a small construction company, approached the crisis with practical logic, asking about search procedures and volunteer coordination. Neither parent could comprehend how their daughter could simply vanish from a hospital parking lot where security cameras should have captured everything. The devastating reality was that the hospital's security system had been scheduled for upgrade the previous month, leaving significant blind spots in the parking area where Jennifer's car was found. The two functioning cameras captured only the far end of the lot, showing normal morning shift activity, but no sign of Jennifer or any suspicious individuals. The initial investigation focused on Jennifer's personal relationships and financial situation. Detective Carson interviewed her boyfriend of 2 years, Mark Davidson, a local contractor who had been at home sleeping when Jennifer disappeared. Mark's alibi was solid. Neighbors confirmed seeing his truck in his driveway all night, and phone records showed no calls or texts between him and Jennifer after her shift began. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Carson discovered that Jennifer had been receiving unwanted attention from someone at the hospital. Several co-workers mentioned that she'd seemed uncomfortable around one particular employee, though none could provide specific details about who or what was making her uneasy. Jennifer had mentioned to her closest friend, nurse Amy Rodriguez, that she felt like someone was watching her during her shifts, but she'd never identified the source of her discomfort. Hospital administrator Dr. James Morrison provided employee lists and work schedules for everyone with access to the building during Jennifer's final night. The list included 23 staff members, doctors, nurses, security guards, maintenance workers, and administrative personnel who had keycard access to the facility. Each would need to be interviewed, their whereabouts verified, and their backgrounds examined for any connection to Jennifer's disappearance. The first suspect to emerge was Danny Kowalski, a 26-year-old paramedic who frequently brought patients to the emergency department during Jennifer's shifts. Several witnesses reported that Danny had asked Jennifer out multiple times over the past year, requests she had politely declined. His obsession with her had become obvious enough that other staff members had begun commenting on his behavior. Under intense questioning, Danny's story contained inconsistencies that Detective Carson interpreted as deception. He claimed to have been home sleeping after his shift ended at 6 a.m., but his neighbor reported seeing him leave his apartment around 6:30. His explanation that he'd forgotten something at work and had to return couldn't be verified because the ambulance service's keycard system was malfunctioning that week. The arrest came on June 15th, accompanied by local media coverage that presumed guilt. Danny's family hired a public defender from Grand Rapids who seemed overwhelmed by the case's complexity and the community's demand for answers. The preliminary hearing revealed the weakness of the prosecution's case. No physical evidence linking Danny to Jennifer's disappearance, no witnesses placing him in the hospital parking lot, and no clear motive beyond unrequited romantic interest. The charges against Danny collapsed in August 2001 when hospital security footage from a neighboring business showed his paramedic unit at the opposite end of town during the crucial crucial time window. But the damage to both Danny and the investigation proved irreversible. Public confidence in the sheriff's department crumbled, and potential witnesses, already hesitant to come forward, retreated further into silence. Patricia Walsh's dining room became a command center for her own investigation, its walls covered with maps, timelines, and photographs that documented her obsessive search for answers about Jennifer's fate. Every evening, after Robert returned from job sites, Patricia spread new evidence across their kitchen table, sharing theories and leads she developed during hours of phone calls and internet research. The missing person flyers that Patricia distributed throughout northern Michigan featured Jennifer's hospital ID photo, her bright smile radiating the warmth that had made her such an effective nurse. Patricia placed these flyers in every business, restaurant, and gas station within a 200-mile radius, personally visiting each location to explain Jennifer's case and provide her contact information. Patricia's annual vigils at the hospital began as small family gatherings, but evolved into community events that drew participants from across the region. Each May 28th, she arrived at the employee parking lot with fresh flowers and battery-powered lanterns, her voice steady as she read from the journal she'd kept since Jennifer's disappearance. Local television stations covered these commemorations with sensitivity during the early years, but Patricia noticed the coverage becoming more superficial as time passed, with younger reporters treating her daughter's story as an annual ritual rather than an ongoing tragedy. The emergence of the internet in the early 2000s brought both hope and frustration to Jennifer's case. Patricia created websites and joined online forums dedicated to missing persons cases, connecting with other families who understood her desperate need for answers. She also attracted attention from amateur investigators and conspiracy theorists who offered theories ranging from human trafficking to supernatural intervention. One particularly persistent online investigator spent 2 years trying to connect Jennifer's disappearance to a series of nurse abductions across the Midwest, submitting hundreds of pages of analysis that demonstrated impressive research skills applied to unrelated cases. Another claimed to have psychic visions of Jennifer trapped in an underground bunker near Lake Michigan, convincing Patricia to fund several expensive searches that yielded nothing but false hope. The most promising lead came in 2007 when construction workers renovating an abandoned warehouse in Manistee discovered a purse buried beneath concrete flooring. The purse contained identification for a young woman who had disappeared from Grand Rapids in 1999, leading investigators to wonder if they'd found evidence of a serial predator operating in the region. Patricia drove to Manistee immediately, convinced that Jennifer's case might finally be connected to other crimes, only to learn that the discovered items had no relationship to her daughter's disappearance. Detective Sarah Martinez arrived in Frankfort in 2018 with a master's degree in forensic science and 5 years of experience working cold cases in Detroit. The 34-year-old investigator had specifically requested assignment to a smaller department where individual efforts could make meaningful impact on unsolved crimes that had been forgotten by larger agencies. Martinez's first encounter with Jennifer's case files occurred in the basement evidence room of the Benzie County Sheriff's Department, where boxes from 2001 sat alongside more recent digital storage systems. The evidence preservation methods of 2001 bore little resemblance to contemporary forensic standards, and Martinez quickly realized that much of the potential DNA evidence had been compromised by storage conditions that reflected the technological limitations of the era. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While examining crime scene photographs of Jennifer's car, Martinez noticed that investigators in 2001 had collected a coffee cup from the vehicle's center console, apparently assuming it belonged to Jennifer. The cup had been stored in a paper evidence bag and forgotten for 17 years, its potential significance overlooked by investigators who lacked access to advanced DNA analysis. Martinez submitted the coffee cup to the Michigan State Crime Laboratory with a request for expedited processing, understanding that trace amounts of saliva might have survived despite the evidence's age and improper storage. The lab's response arrived 8 weeks later with results that would transform the investigation's direction. The cup contained DNA from 2 individuals, one profile matching Jennifer's known DNA from her hairbrush, and a second profile from an unknown male subject. The unknown profile was immediately entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which compared the genetic markers against millions of profiles from convicted criminals and unsolved cases across the United States. The initial search produced no matches, indicating that Jennifer's abductor had either never been arrested for a felony crime requiring DNA submission or had committed his crime before mandatory DNA collection became standard practice in Michigan. Martinez understood that traditional investigative methods had reached their limits with Jennifer's case, and she began exploring advanced forensic techniques that had emerged during the previous decade. Forensic genetic genealogy represented a revolutionary approach to cold case investigation, using commercial DNA databases to identify suspects through their genetic relationships to distant relatives who had submitted samples for ancestry research. The process required extracting every available molecule of genetic material from the coffee cup and employing specialized laboratory techniques to amplify degraded DNA samples. Martinez worked with a private laboratory in Virginia that specialized in forensic genealogy, submitting the unknown male's profile for comparison against genealogy databases containing millions of consumer genetic profiles. The genealogy analysis consumed 6 months of computer processing and genetic analysis. During this time, Martinez continued investigating other aspects of Jennifer's case, re-interviewing witnesses who had been questioned in 2001 and examining evidence with fresh perspective informed by 2 decades of advances in criminal investigation techniques. The technique involved constructing family trees for genetic matches and using demographic information to narrow potential suspects based on age, geographic location, and other factors relevant to the 2001 timeframe. When the genealogy results arrived in Martinez's email inbox on January 15, 2020, they contained information that would shatter Frankfurt's understanding of Jennifer's case. The unknown DNA profile matched genetic markers associated with the Thompson family tree, specifically indicating a connection to Earl Thompson, the hospital maintenance worker who had mopped the same floors Jennifer walked during her final shift. Martinez spent the following weeks conducting surveillance on Thompson while building a case that could withstand legal scrutiny. The investigation required collecting comparative DNA samples through discarded items, confirming the genetic match through multiple independent tests, and establishing Thompson's opportunity to commit the crime through employment records and witness interviews. The evidence connecting Earl Thompson to Jennifer's disappearance extended far beyond DNA. Employment records showed that Thompson had worked the night shift at the hospital since 1998, giving him intimate knowledge of staff schedules and routines. His maintenance duties provided access to every area of the facility, including security systems and employee parking areas. Most damning, several nurses who had worked with Jennifer recalled that she had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around the maintenance staff, though she had never specified which individual was causing her unease. Thompson's personnel file contained no disciplinary actions or complaints during his 23-year tenure at the hospital. Supervisors described him as reliable, quiet, and dedicated to his work. His background check from 1998 had revealed no criminal history beyond a single speeding ticket, but deeper investigation revealed disturbing patterns that had been invisible to casual observation. Hospital staff members, when questioned carefully, admitted that Thompson had shown unusual interest in female employees, particularly nurses who worked night shifts. Several women recalled conversations where Thompson had asked personal questions about their schedules, living arrangements, and transportation habits. Most had dismissed his curiosity as awkward attempts at friendliness from a lonely older man, but in the context of Jennifer's disappearance, his behavior revealed a more predatory pattern. Martinez discovered that Thompson's access to the hospital extended far beyond normal working hours. His maintenance position required him to respond to emergency calls, giving him legitimate reasons to be in the building during evenings, weekends, and holidays. Security logs from 2001 showed that Thompson had badge access to the facility during the early morning hours when Jennifer disappeared. The most chilling discovery came when Martinez examined Thompson's relationship with other missing women in the region. Over the past 2 decades, 3 other nurses from northern Michigan hospitals had vanished under mysterious circumstances. While these cases had never been connected due to their geographic spread and different investigating agencies, Martinez's analysis revealed disturbing similarities in timing, victim profile, and circumstances. The interrogation room at the Benzie County Sheriff's Department had witnessed numerous confessions over the years, but Earl Thompson's methodical dismantling of 20 years of lies created an atmosphere that veteran investigators would later describe as uniquely unsettling. Thompson had waived his right to an attorney with the same matter-of-fact demeanor he'd displayed during decades of hospital work, explaining to Martinez that he'd been expecting this conversation for years and saw no point in legal representation. Thompson's confession began with May 28, 2001, but his account revealed that Jennifer's murder had been the culmination of months of planning and observation rather than a spontaneous act of violence. His position as night shift maintenance supervisor had provided access to employee schedules, parking assignments, and security protocols that allowed him to study Jennifer's routines with the patience of a predator who understood that successful hunting required extensive preparation. He explained that he'd first noticed Jennifer during her orientation in 1999. Something about her kindness to an elderly patient had triggered fantasies that began with observation and escalated to detailed planning over the following 2 years. He'd learned her work patterns by timing his maintenance rounds to coincide with her patient care activities, noting her habits, and calculating the vulnerabilities in her daily routine. The actual abduction had been simpler than Thompson had anticipated. He'd waited in the parking lot until Jennifer finished her shift, approaching her car under the pretense of reporting a maintenance issue that required her immediate attention. When she turned to listen, he'd used a maintenance tool to render her unconscious before loading her into his work van. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, executed with the efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed every detail multiple times. Thompson described transporting Jennifer to an abandoned hunting cabin approximately 40 miles northeast of Frankfurt, a location he'd prepared specifically for what he described as extended interaction with his victim. The cabin, part of a property that had been foreclosed and forgotten by its banking institution, provided the isolation Thompson required for activities that had lasted 3 days before Jennifer succumbed to injuries he described as accidental. The psychological evaluation that followed Thompson's confession revealed complex pathology that had remained hidden beneath his carefully constructed facade of reliability and service. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the forensic psychologist who interviewed Thompson over 12 sessions, documented evidence of antisocial personality disorder combined with psychopathic traits that had enabled him to compartmentalize his criminal behavior while maintaining normal employment and community relationships. Thompson's description of the days following Jennifer's murder revealed the calculated manner in which he'd integrated himself into the hospital's response to her disappearance. His participation in search efforts organized by hospital administration had provided emotional satisfaction and practical intelligence about the investigation's progress, allowing him to monitor law enforcement activities while appearing to support the colleague he'd murdered. The location of Jennifer's remains, which Thompson revealed with clinical precision, would require specialized recovery equipment and forensic experts trained in excavating human remains from wilderness locations. Martinez understood that bringing Jennifer home to her family would represent both closure and devastating confirmation of the violence she'd endured during her final days. The courtroom where Earl Thompson entered his guilty plea on August 12, 2021, contained every available seat filled with members of a community struggling to reconcile 2 decades of misplaced trust with the horrific reality of Jennifer Walsh's murder. Patricia Walsh sat in the front row, her composition reflecting the strength that had sustained her through 20 years of searching for answers about her daughter's fate. Judge Robert Thompson, no relation to the defendant, had presided over hundreds of criminal cases during his 18-year judicial career, but the weight of Thompson's confession and its implications for hospital safety created an atmosphere unlike anything he'd previously experienced. The man who stood before his bench had been trusted with keys to every room where vulnerable patients received care, had worked alongside the victim he'd murdered, and had maintained his facade of normalcy while knowing exactly what he'd done to Jennifer and her family. The victim impact statements that preceded Thompson's sentencing revealed the devastating ripple effects his crime had created throughout the medical community and Jennifer's extended family. Patricia Walsh's statement, delivered in the controlled voice that had characterized her public appearances for 2 decades, described the destruction of her marriage, the loss of relationships with friends who'd grown tired of her obsession with finding Jennifer, and the transformation of her home into an investigative command center that had consumed her adult life. Robert Walsh, who had divorced Patricia in 2019 after years of growing apart during their separate grief processes, described the gradual erosion of hope that had characterized his experience as Jennifer's father. His statement revealed the private anguish of a man who'd watched his wife disappear into her investigation while struggling with his own grief and the practical demands of maintaining a construction business and normal life in a community where everyone knew about his missing daughter. For those who have followed this case from the beginning, Jennifer Walsh's story serves as a reminder that the most dangerous predators often hide behind facades of normalcy and service. If you've been following along with this investigation, consider subscribing to stay informed about other cases that deserve attention, and share your thoughts about how healthcare institutions can better protect employees who work vulnerable shifts in isolated areas. The resolution of Jennifer's case after 20 years demonstrates both the power of advancing forensic technology and the devastating impact that violent crime has on families and communities who must live with uncertainty until science and persistence finally provide answers to questions that seem impossible to resolve.